Just flat out offer you jobs, like no promise there, but it's in a sense of using it as a kind of a springboard to getting like maybe your dream job. It's something that you can use too.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think having open source experience on your resume, especially in technologies that are specific, that companies are using, will be a huge advantage to getting jobs there. So it provides value in that way.
Okay.
Okay, like from a maintainer's perspective or from a company's perspective, directly an open source project does not pay. However, if you exploit services around an open source project, it eventually can pay off. We've seen companies like Red Hat and other startups that have started out with open source, which is ideally free, but because of the services around it, it eventually can pay off.
So how do they make money? So is their platform completely open source?
Yes, it's completely free. However, they have services around it. Yeah, I mean, it could be maybe a particular company wants some bug fix as faster, so they call engineers directly, and then that's how Red Hat works. Like so it's a service around the product, but the product itself is entirely free.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Maybe another example is Sidekick. Sidekick is open source, but they make money through enterprise. So there are some companies which might want extra added services or optimizations, and that's how they make money. So for someone who is employed, they're really good software engineers, or maybe students who have a busy schedule. Why does open source matter to them?
I think you can learn a lot through like just the variety of projects that you work on. So I guarantee that every new open source project that you dive into, you'll pick up something new, just seeing how other people have done things and getting feedback on your contributions. I think we already touched upon this, but it's a great way to get visibility around the work that you do and to be able to point to the contributions that you've made when you are eventually applying for a job.
As a student, I started contributing. Okay, I'm still a student, however, I do contribute. So for a student, when you leave school, they'll usually ask you for work experience, yeah? So as a techie, I think open source is the best work experience we can ever have. It's like a musician. I usually give this example to the Rails girls. It's like a musician always longs for that time when they're given a microphone on stage to do some song, yeah? But with software development or technology, we have open source. It's free, like it's there. You can always join and leave at any time you probably want. And the code you contribute to open source is actually production ready. It's used by people all over the world. So it's real world like experience. It's something you can, so in other words, you're having experience as you're still in school. Yeah.
That leaving whenever you want thing is a really positive, like yeah, that's great. Also, I think that it's often you'll end up in a situation where you're the smartest person in the room or maybe the only person in the room, and it's really hard to grow when you're not being challenged by other people. So this is kind of, open source is a way to kind of be in a room with people possibly way smarter than you. You don't have to go to a place, you don't have to go anywhere, but you constantly have people looking at your code when you're doing things that might be done in a more efficient or just a whole concept that you've never thought of. You have people that are responding to your pull requests saying, why exactly did you do this? Sometimes all you need is for someone to say, why did you do this? And then for you to have to say, this is why, and then you're like, oh, hold on a second. But if you're the only person there, which I am a lot of the time, like I don't have that. So I'm probably making a lot of stupid mistakes and I have no idea that there's better ways to do it. So I think that open source is a cool way to get that. So.
I was just going to add, I think it's a great way to continue practicing your craft by exposing yourself to different ways of solving the same solutions. And it's also great for networking. I made a lot of connections from people that I could never physically get in contact with simply by contributing to open source and learning from them.
Okay. How do you get started in open source?
I know GitLab and GitHub have fantastic pages that give you introductions to this, as well as Free Code Camp has also a very easy path that a beginner could follow to get into open source. There's a lot of documentation online. It's simply, my recommendation is always, if you consume software and you have a passion about something, try and see if they have an open source platform and then look at the issues that are there. There's usually beginner labeled issues, and from there you follow your passion. It's much easier to contribute than to pick something that's easy but you don't have any connection with.
Yeah, my interaction with open source has been a bit different. I never just went and sought out a project and started contributing to it. It would always be the case where I was using this project and it didn't have a feature that I needed, or there was a bug in it that I needed to fix. And at that point, I would just jump in and fix it or add the feature that I need. And I find that's a really, at least for me, a really good way to do it, because you shouldn't build a feature just to build a feature. And if I need that, then probably many of the other users need it. And so I find that a really helpful way, because other people are getting benefit out of it, but also I'm getting benefit out of it.
Okay.
So from experience, I was a developer working for a company. However, there was a barrier. There was sort of like a barrier. I didn't know how to really get started. I really knew I wanted to, but I didn't know how. So I would advise first is you could try, if you're very intimidated like I was, you try joining through summer programs. If you're a student, there are a couple of summer programs like Google Summer of Code, there's Rails Girls Summer of Code, there are even other summer programs where you do not need to be a student. So it's like guided mentorship into getting you started to contributing to open source. However, maybe you may not get that chance, or you may never hear about that chance. What you could do is find a project either you use, the simplest is something you use. For example, you use Ubuntu, or whatever tool, or you use Sublime, or you use Rails, for example, and try to see what would you want to have in Rails, what new feature, what's that feature you miss in Rails, and you just look out for a mailing list. They're all over. Just Google Rails mailing list. You'll always find that mailing list, and email them that particular thing maybe you really miss in Rails, or that killer project of yours. That is a starting point. You don't need to write code, and then you could ask all the questions on that mailing list. These days, open source people are very friendly. Earlier, they were a bit mean, but these days they are very friendly. So they answer every question. You can even ask for a first-time task to work on, because maybe you want to give back to the community, but you don't know how to start, or where is the need. You could also ask for those tasks on those mailing lists. So yeah, it's not as easy, and I also understand, because I was there for 2 years. I was struggling, but you just need to be determined and make the first step towards. Yeah.
I'm going to have a shameless self-plug here and say you can also watch my talk at the same conference from last year where I covered the same topic.
So, there are many people who are contributing to open source projects, but how do you start your own open source project and build a community around it? How do you do that so that you don't end up being the only person who is contributing to that project? How do you do that? To have, see what Rails has done. So there are many people contributing to Rails. So there's a core team, but there are thousands, I think thousands of people contributing. How do you do that?
Yeah. Okay. It's cutting in and out. Yeah, my main experience with that is has all been like through private companies where we build tools that we need, and then we eventually realize there's nothing proprietary about this, and it could provide a lot of value to others as well. And I think that's a really good place to start from, because we know that it provides value. Like, we built it because we need it, and if it provides value to other people, then they're likely to contribute to it and kind of make it into what they need as well. I've never started an open source project myself, so I can't speak to that, but I think a lot of it just comes from the value that it provides, then people will want to contribute to it.
Okay.
And something I just talked about with PJ is that you also need to talk about it. You need to constantly be talking about it. You need to go to conferences and just have it in front of people. Like with any marketing, people need to know about it. So even if it's something that's very valuable and people don't know about it, then they're never going to find out about it or use it. So it's kind of just like getting that thing, like what Luca did with Hanami. Like, it's just like talk about it constantly. That's
Okay.
I think this is where open source and entrepreneurship really have a common ground. As an entrepreneur, you need to solve a problem that exists in the real world, that people have a need for that solution. With open source as well, if you just provide something for free but no one really needs that service, then it dies. So this is where, as an entrepreneur and as a developer, you have a common ground to provide a solution to an actual need.
You need to have an entrepreneurship mentality to push it. Okay. How do you set time for contributing to open source? What time do you contribute, and
It depends at what point in life you are. If you are a student, you probably have other priority things to do, so you could contribute to open source during your sabbatical. For example, I usually contribute to open source on holiday because my schoolwork is too much at times, but it's addictive sometimes, and I can't wait for a Saturday or a holiday or my next whatever. So I find myself, like, I don't plan to write code, and then I find myself looking through issues and fixing something. So sometimes it's random, but you need to create time for it, and don't put yourself on pressure. Like, if I don't contribute to PyPy, probably it will never be better. There is a reason why open source is, we call ourselves, like, we work in a community. So those projects are actually maintained by community. So whether you're not there or not there, never feel the guilt or pressure that I'm not contributing, so probably something bad is going to happen. So just create your own time, prioritize your things in life, your family, your wife and kids, whatever, and also have time for open source. Yeah.
okay.
I'm horrible at this, so.
Yeah, I'm very lucky in the sense that my employer really puts a lot of value on open source and really encourages all the engineers at the company to contribute whenever they see opportunities. So I can include it in my workday whenever it's needed. We also have something called an open source sabbatical, where engineers on product teams can go and just work on open source code for like 6 months and continue to be like paid by the company. So that's pretty sweet.
Before you proceed, how does that work in your company? Do you wake up one day and say, I don't want to commit code to this company, I just want to focus on this project? How is it managed from the perspective of product management and project management?
Yeah, I mean, there needs to be some sort of value that will be provided back to us. So it has to be like on an open source project that we use, but we use a lot of open source projects, so that doesn't really limit the selection. But yeah, basically every I think 6 months they do like a new application round, and people apply with a specific project that they want to work on. And then the Rails core team at Shopify, who are full-time open source, they review the applications and select like what product they think is the highest priority, and then that person goes and works on that for 6 months.
Okay.
I definitely agree. You can get your company to buy in if you can show that it provides value coming back to the company. And I was also going to add, I don't know what the status is right now, so don't quote me on this, but there was an Open Source Friday movement started last year from one of the speakers from this conference. I don't know what the status is right now, but the idea behind that was on Fridays, engineers throughout the world would get together and just contribute on any issue on any of the open source platforms. So that's an easy way to just think of having one day where you can now just look for an easy issue, solve it, push it. There's also, in Christmas, there's, I think is it the 12 or 24 pull requests, where every single day you're supposed to contribute open source by pushing a pull request leading up until 25th, Christmas Day. And so that's
on GitHub or on which platform?
I believe it's on GitHub, but you can double check that. Okay. So there's various initiatives that if you don't have an idea what to contribute to, there's people providing tags and movements and social media movements to show you that there is platforms that you could contribute to. So you could look into this as well, and especially in your downtime in the evenings, I think that's when I do most of my open source, especially also early in the morning sometimes. I just look for an easy solution and try and see if I can push a fix. Yeah.
Okay. Questions from the audience?
As a follow-up to that, there's actually...
Let's use the mic for that. You can pass on the mic.
A friend of mine, Richard Schieman, runs something called codetriage.com, and you sign up there and you kind of tell it what types of projects you're interested in, and it emails you every day a link to like an open pull request or an issue that you can look at, and you don't even need to contribute code. Maybe you can just look at the pull request and say, hey, this makes sense, or hey, I tried to get this running and it doesn't work. And that saves maintainers a lot of time too. So it's not always code that you're writing that's contributing to open source.
I think that's a great point. My first contribution was simply updating documentation for a React on Rails project. It doesn't always have to be code, it can be a lot of other open source related tools.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. It's not a question kind of, but when you guys were discussing what to make, so on and off, when you guys were discussing how to make money using open source, I immediately thought about the relationship between DHH and Shopify. And I think DHH makes so much money from Shopify because Shopify runs on Rails. He's a consultant, if I'm not wrong, for that. So if you have an open source project out, then if a big company happens to use it, then you're probably going to be the consultant. You might make money out of that. Yeah.
I just wanted to add to what he said. There is Code Triage, but there's also one more website called as codecuriosity.org, which kind of gamifies the open source. So if you want to get into open contribution and also have like a gamification aspect to it, it's a good site if you want to check out codecuriosity.org.
Questions from the audience?
It's karaoke. I just wanted to talk about open source politics. I think the Rails community, Rails was merged into Verb, and I see a lot of discussions on the Rails timeline on GitHub to open source dynamic.
I mean, there's a couple options, like anything that's open source, as you were saying earlier, depending on the license, you can always just fork it and make your own version if they really don't want it to go into the like master branch and it's just something that you need, then like you can fork it. It's just then you'll have to make sure that it's updated. So that's not ideal. I don't think there's any easy solution. I think you just need to explain why you need something, and perhaps like it does only apply to you, and that's not really a valid reason for putting it in there. But if you can explain why and why it might help other people, then perhaps that will work. I haven't myself had any personal experiences with like politics or people not wanting to add things. I find if you explain well enough, often it goes okay.
Other questions?
There's one in the back.
There's one over there, at the back.
Hi. So regarding the question of licenses, do you do an audit of the projects and the licenses, or using it in such a Shopify, for example, like you are not
I think the question, it was cutting in and out, but I think the question is if we double check the licenses of gems before using them. Is that correct? Yeah? Yeah, I mean, definitely we have, at this point, we're a public company and we have a whole team of lawyers, and we have to be very careful about the things that we do, and that's something that we definitely are careful about. We don't use anyone's code that doesn't want us to use it.
I had I thought it was a funny experience a few weeks ago where there was a mining pool thing that I wanted to start working on, and there was no license for the project. So I opened an issue of asking where the license is, which you'll often see as the first issues for lots of projects. And he instantly closed my issue, and I was kind of in contact with him over Discord. And I asked him, I'm like, hey dude, what's your deal? Why'd you just automatically close my issue? You didn't answer it. What's going on? And then he went into a bunch about how the law is awful and everyone should do things illegally, and it was not the response. I thought he was going to be like, oh, that's a stupid thing to say or something, but it was completely in another direction. It's probably off topic, but it was yeah, guess related.
Hello everyone, my name is Eric. I have a question regarding when you're doing your own projects or even for consulting. What criteria do you use before you choose to go with a certain open source project? Because we've seen some cases whereby companies, they open source their project and then, or a library. Then after a while, they abandon it, and you find that no one is no longer contributing to it. And yeah. Also, what's your opinion on the issue of companies having side clauses on their licenses? Because there was an issue on React JS, which was licensed on, and I don't know the license. Was it BSD? But then there was a patent clause on it, which meant that if you were a competitor to Facebook and you decide to sue them in the future, then you could not do that because you were using their project. So, what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, like I would be lying if I said we never included a gem or something that we eventually removed. I think there is some due diligence that needs to be done up front around licensing, around also like looking through the code, seeing if it's actively maintained, seeing how many other people are using it. Those can all be like good indicators of kind of like the health of an open source project. But it might be the case that something works for you for a while and then doesn't. I know like in the Shopify core code base, every time anyone adds a gem to the gem file, there's always very heated discussion because if you need one feature from a gem and it has like 10 other ones, then perhaps you should just build that one feature yourself if you're just introducing bloat. But it's kind of case by case. I think you just need to do the due diligence up front to take a look into what you're actually using.
One final question. Do you want to answer that? To add on to that question?
I was just going to add, I think, well, in my experience in my company, sometimes when we want to add, because we're dealing with a lot of Elixir apps now where the ecosystem is quite young, you have to do the due diligence of also trying to explore the code base and see if maybe some of that solution you could put it in yourself, or you'd be prepared to have a fork of that project and maintain your own independent version if, for example, the maintainers are no longer around. So I think, yeah, definitely, as you say, there's a lot of due diligence you need to take, but good indicators are usually the amount of stars or followers who have forked from a project and when was the last time it was updated. Sometimes a project is not updated in a long time, but that's because it's stable. So you also have to take that into consideration. But yeah, it's a lot of due diligence on you as a developer and your professional ethics that you make sure that what you pull into a project for a client is good for them in the long term.
Final question.
All right, so my question is, when open source and closed source softwares are combined, what is the resulting of the combination? Will it be open source or closed source?
Forgot to introduce yourself.
Okay, I'm Daniel Otieno.
So is Daniel Otieno, organizer of Mombasa Nairobi community?
That's right.
That's a very interesting question. I think it needs a lot of analysis of the licenses at play, but a good example of closed source and open source working together is, for example, GitLab. The community edition is completely free and open source, but they have the enterprise edition, which has some extra features, which is closed and private to them. And there they're providing a platform that's available publicly, but with enhanced features, it's private. I think it really boils down to the licenses that are at play. If they merge what they're allowed to do with the open source code in the private version of the application, or if they borrow from another project the open source material and add it to the private one, it really boils down a lot on what licenses are involved here.
Okay, your final remarks about open source and entrepreneurship. You can start here.
So, open source is not a threat to any company or any other product that other people are building. I think if you are a company, you should just cooperate with other open source projects because there's a lot of benefit in using, leveraging open source tools. First of all, time to market will be it's quite faster when you decide to leverage some of these tools. And that's to companies. And then to just a student or somebody navigating their career, open source is very beneficial to you. It gives you the platform to showcase skills to the whole world. You stop being limited by statistics in your own country. For example, in Uganda, the unemployment rate is so high. But with open source, the exposure is global, so you're able to tap into opportunities that are global, that are not just local to your country or wherever. You stop playing games of time zones and the statistics in your own country. Yeah, so.
I highly recommend contributing for being a maintainer, because being a maintainer can really be a lot of work, like an incredible amount of work with just the communication overhead can be a lot. But contribute. It's a great way to get constructive criticism and to really have mentors kind of for free. It's great for that.
Yeah, I would just echo what has been said so far. And the only thing I would add is it's something that you can do to give back. Can I use that one? It's something that you can do to give back to the community, and at the end of the day, that makes you feel good and really helps other people. In my experience, I have never experienced that type of political people not wanting things. I've always found that maintainers are very, very grateful when you do contribute, because you're essentially doing some of their work for them.
Before I close, I'll just quickly touch on the political question that was raised earlier. I think the beauty of open source is that it's community driven. And if you have a feature that the maintainer of the project is rejecting, chances are that perhaps your feature isn't that much of a common case, and you need to rethink of how to solve this the way it's commonly been done. Or if it's actually an important need, then the power of the people will get that maintainer to change, or a new project will be born that supports what the people want. And so that's the beauty of open source, in my eyes, is that it's hard to really be controlled by one person. It can open doors for the majority, and personally it opened doors for me. I would encourage anyone to start contributing open source, consuming open source. I think don't think just in terms of code, even books. Knowledge is basically what we're open sourcing. And so look at books that are online, that are freely available, that you can teach yourself, and use all these things that you can now access here simply using internet to be your mentor and your guidelines and to build your career.
Those were great remarks. So let's all keep contributing and be involved in open source projects. So that's really important. It's not only you're not only doing that to benefit or to get another job, but when you contribute or when you start an open source project, there are many people you are helping and impacting. Imagine if the Rails core team stopped contributing on Rails or even Ruby. So we'll all be left hanging. So let's keep contributing. Thank you, William, Kirsten, Aaron, and Joanne. Let's clap for them.